Nice. Alright, on the whole, that's so much better. We got HD, baby. So it's taken me a while to make this video because unlike with the other books I reviewed, I'd never read Moby Dick before I decided I'd make this video, so I had to read it, and that took a month. But even though I'd never read Moby Dick, I knew it was going on the shit list. So let me just say really quickly, so the shit list is a special group of books that have either intimidated me or caused me psychological, I almost said physical, that have caused me psychological harm while reading. So obviously the list is pretty long. And Moby Dick falls under the former category. That would be books I find intimidating. But it's done. I've conquered the white whale, who, by the way, doesn't show up until the last 20 or so pages of the book. So keep that in mind if you're reading and you're like in it for the white whale content, you're not gonna get it. And how do I feel? I feel jubilant, I feel invigorated, I feel filled with wiles and the spirit of spermaceti, which isn't that different from my usual, so. But Moby Dick was an interesting read, and I'd like to tell you why. Hi, I'm Nitwit, welcome to Shitlit. Moby Dick is a 500 or so page journey across the seas and an epistemological primer on whales and whaling circa the mid-19th century. In the story, we follow Ishmael, a sailor aboard the Pequod, as he takes part in the day-to-day affairs aboard a whaling ship, under the command of the single-minded Captain Ahab. So Ahab's headed out for this big white sperm whale who's called Moby Dick since Moby Dick f***ed off with his leg. Ahab's bent on killing Moby Dick for revenge. Baby, it's very precarious, don't bump into it. So now we're going to talk about the story, but to talk about the story, we're first going to talk about the author of the story. So Herman Melville, the book's author, is a guy with a bit of a fetish for the exotic. His first books, Typee and Omu, or Umu, I think it's Omu, earned him a following of readers who were captivated by Melville's chosen subject, which was the lifetimes and adventures of a white dude in the South Pacific. Moby Dick, surprisingly, wasn't actually appreciated as part of like the American literary renaissance until the early 20th century, when it was championed by Carl Van Doren in his study called The American Novel. From there, the story earned attention of reviewers and other writers. By the time the 1930s and 40s rolled around, Moby Dick had been catapulted into the realm of the literary known. Popular interest in the book had led to numerous adaptations in plays and cinema. One adaptation was written by Ray Bradbury, who's the writer of Fahrenheit 451. He wrote the short story that inspired Elton John's song Rocket Man. Rocket Man. So now we're going to talk about the story with more specificity. So interestingly, Ishmael is one of the least consequential people we meet aboard the Pequod, though the story of Moby Dick is presumably his. The reflections and commentary of more major crew members dominate the narrative. So because these other crew members are really big players in the story, we're going to talk about them individually. So Ahab is the monomaniacal captain of the Pequod. He's got one leg, he's filled with rage and vinegar, he has a family actually, doesn't really care. And then we have Queequeg, who is the cannibalistic harpooner who becomes Ishmael's close friend and then joins him aboard the Pequod. And regarding the cannibal aspect, Melville just made up a bunch of cannibalistic cultures for the purposes of the story, which doesn't surprise. So now we're going to talk about Tashtego. So Tashtego is a Wampanoag harpooner who's described as having a knack for hunting beasts of all sorts. You get it? It's because he's Native American. Dagu is a West African harpooner, and he's the Pequod's 6'5" Miss America. He's described as having this graceful bearing in spite of being just the biggest dude aboard the ship. And now we'll talk about the mates, who are more outspoken over the course of the novel. Starbuck is Ahab's first mate and the book's resident stickler for duty. Starbuck is against the hunt for Moby Dick, but he begrudgingly goes along because he was ordered to by his captain, and his duty to follow orders supersedes his distaste for the hunt. Stubb is the second mate. He's relaxed and smiley, and he's kind of a chatterbox. Flask is the third mate. He's this short dude, and he's really into murdering whales. Those are all the notes I have for Flask. But the trajectory of the story is largely just the life and times aboard a whaling ship, with just sort of Ahab's vengeance peppered in here and there. Usually when they cross paths with other boats, these are called gams, Ahab will start by asking, like, have you seen the white whale? Yeah, and a lot of the time the answer is no. So most of the book is given over to either these sections about, the life and times on a whaling ship, but there are also these highly encyclopedic sections on like whale anatomy, whale behavior, the processing of whale parts. Yeah, but the hunt for Moby Dick is very secondary to what is mainly going on, which is experiencing life aboard a whaling ship. So now we're going to talk about the response to Moby Dick from when it was first published. At the time Moby Dick was published, slavery hadn't been abolished in America, and the American literary scene was still in its developmental stages. Largely, American reviewers of Moby Dick were accused of parroting the opinions of British reviewers. And I actually, after reading the reviews, am not sure quite how true that is. One thing that is for sure, though, is that Moby Dick's impact at publication was nowhere near what it would be almost 100 years later. And it's therefore kind of entertaining to see London-based reviewers calling the book wantonly eccentric and saying it was made up of preposterous yarn. Although there's another review, and I think this is from an American reviewer, and that kind of rivals the wantonly eccentric and preposterous yarn bit. Listen to this. If there are any of our readers who wish to find examples of bad rhetoric, involved syntax, stilted sentiment, and incoherent English, we will take the liberty of recommending to them this precious volume of Mr. Melville's. Yeah, so kind of harsh. But now we're going to talk about some themes that are present throughout the book. So our first theme is anti-self-reliance, and to talk about anti-self-reliance, we'll first talk about transcendentalism. Bear with me. Transcendentalism was a literary and philosophical ideology that took root in America in the 1830s and 40s. Transcendentalism theorized that goodness is innate based on the idea that the divine pervades all things. And the application of those ideas saw intuition being prioritized over empiricism. However, Melville's rhetorical stance in Moby Dick is definitively anti-transcendentalism, or at least absent of transcendentalist ideas. So in Moby Dick, nature is a divine force, yes, but it's one that augurs danger more often than beauty or awe. No one character may face off against Melville's natural forces and expect a favorable outcome. For instance, in order to fulfill the Pequod's purpose in hunting whales, she must use her entire crew. In addition, there's no individual agent sufficient to process the sperm whale after it's caught and dead. A belief in one's agency is a hallmark of transcendentalist thought, and this agency is sidestepped in the narrative, not because self-reliance is an unworthy virtue, but because it's useless aboard the deck of the Pequod, where men must work together to meet their desired ends. So whaling is also dangerous, and the reader's given descriptions of the assorted hazards of whaling alongside being reminded of Ahab's intransigent fury. So where transcendentalist work attempts to strengthen a sense of oneness between the subject of an experience and nature, Melville's depiction of Ahab and the sea do quite the opposite, cultivating a sense of otherness between the reader and a hostile, unpredictable ocean. Moby Dick does legwork to understand or help the reader understand whales. There are whole sections dedicated to different cresting habits, whale movements, and sperm whale body parts, particularly relevant to after the whale is dead when they're processing the parts for Harvest. But the journey to understand something obscure or unknown is at the heart of the story. In many ways, it's what drives the reader through the narrative, who presumably is not that familiar with whales and whaling. And it's kind of interesting how this is true of, like, the audience who would be reading in the 19th century and us now. It's kind of a foreign thing. Over the course of the story, the crew of the Pequod also comes to understand the degree of their captain's madness, but not before Ahab takes everybody down with him. So this journey to understand or perceive new things in the world is kind of at odds with Ahab's experience aboard the Pequod, hankering for the death of Moby Dick. He is not, unlike Ishmael, he's not learning anything new. He's done this for years, and he's really, I would say, jaded, but it's not as much as that he's like jaded with like whaling, being a sea captain, as much as he's, yeah, just really, really single-mindedly trying to kill this whale. This is this man's whole character. Not his whole character. It kind of all revolves around like this like rage that he's got inside of him. Though this journey to understand sort of more foreign aspects of the world, whales and whaling, is in the story, a lack of respect of the power for the subject that you're trying to understand, whales, winds up being the downfall of the whole crew. Just kind of, yeah, go along with Ahab's hunt, unfortunately. So now we're going to talk about, this kind of goes hand in hand with like perception and seeking to understand, but this idea of the other. So othering is the view that an entity or group is intrinsically different from oneself, and the outcome of othering is often alienation from the perceived other. And without this perception of the other in whales, in Moby Dick, there would be no cause to understand them, no fascination with their lifestyle, and no reason to write the story. But the other also appears thematically on the deck of the Pequod. So Fedallah is one of several characters who's kept below deck by Ahab until everybody's called to the boats to pursue their first whale. It's never clear why Ahab separates Fedallah and the others from the rest of the crew. He's supposed to be Middle Eastern, I think. But the crew never accepts Fedallah and the others who appeared with him, and the second mate, Stubb, actually goes on this pretty unforgiving rant where he calls Fedallah the devil in disguise. And he claims that Fedallah actually has like a devil's tail that he tucks up like in his pants, sort of thing. So the other is simultaneously present, sought after, and shunned aboard the Pequod, depending on the kind of other we're talking about, which is just an interesting comparison to draw. But honestly, between being harvested and ostracized, I definitely choose being ostracized. Those are two evils I'll never have to choose between, I don't think, though. So Moby Dick was a pretty decent read. Would I recommend it? Not unless you want the, I will admit, immense satisfaction of wading through chapter upon chapter of prose, like just sailing prose. You've got like the encyclopedic chapters, but you're wading through some pretty dense prose to get to the place where the white whale actually shows up and fucks everyone to shit, which, when it happens, so satisfying, so satisfying. Very much like that scene in the fourth Harry Potter, where Harry's got like his dragon he's fighting, and the dragon flies through the tent, and Fred and George are like, yeah, dragon. Well done, dragon! That's how it felt, seeing Ahab's downfall. I didn't feel sad. I felt like, oh my god, finally. It's kind of grisly how he goes, though. I'm not going to tell you how he goes. I attached the PDF. Go look at the last 20 pages. It's like in the last 2. So, yeah. That's my recommendation. It won't take me as long to upload next time. I think I'll do a book that I've already read, or I'll just be faster. And I have a nice camera now, so I won't have any upload difficulties. Yeah, this has been Shitlit. I'm Nitwit. I'll see you in a bit.